When we last saw our protagonist... Really? Protagonist? Is that how you see yourself? What? Well, I'm the only one in the videos. I'm the main character. It's just me. What do you want? I mean, protagonist, really? Don't you think that's a little bit pretentious? Well, that's not even a word. It's the way you're saying it. I don't know how you want me to say it. This is what I'm talking. Well, don't say it like that. I'm reading what you... Would you just read the script? When we last saw our protagonist, financial constraints were beginning to affect his mental outlook, compounded with the loss of precious footage of sage grouse. He began taking work anywhere he could get it, a path that would lead him down to some shady characters. And now you know the terrible secret of my shady dealings and how I acquire money for this project. By selling bird pictures to cats. No. And because I am the king of continuity, I recorded that bit 2 months ago, several hundred miles away, across a state line, and am now able to finish up. I had a problem. I was running out of storage space, and I talked about that in previous videos and what that meant, and went into an entire thing of the data that I use and how much and what I need it for. When I started originally doing photos, I didn't need all that much storage space. This 500 gigabyte SSD would hold most of everything. Eventually I wound up moving them off of there and onto other drives as a backup, but for the most part, that would handle it. When I started doing video, I needed more storage space. So when I purchased my first video camera and started recording videos, I also picked up a NAS, a network attached storage. Basically, it's a small computer within itself, but it has a very specific function. It just holds hard drives, standard old hard drives in here. It attaches, it connects through your network as opposed to being directly connected into your computer, which means that this can handle most of the computing power of moving files on and off. It also serves as other functions, and what I'm using it for now is my own personal files that are not wildlife related or any kind of video footage, documents, movies, games, things like that can be accessed on here over the network. Despite the fact that I put a 12 terabyte and a 10 terabyte hard drive in here because it has two drives, two bays for drives. 22 terabytes is not actually the full size of it because you lose some of it for the OS and things on there. Still, after about 20, I filled that up in a year and a half of taking video. Trying to save as much as I can, as I've talked about. This wasn't exactly cheap, and buying more of them doesn't really solve the problem. To just collect up more of these, what I needed was something bigger. Enter something bigger. This serves almost the same function. This is what I got back in May, where I ordered all the components, built it myself, and it has a lot more storage space. It doesn't look like much, but let's take a look inside. It still might not look like much. But what it is a giant server. Giant physically. This is much bigger than any of the other towers that I've built before, and it is just loaded to the brim with hard drives. We've got 10 drives in here right now, including the old ones that I pulled out of that other NAS that I just showed you, the ones that were all inside of my editing computer, and then I picked up 5 new ones because I was going all in on this. This has over 100 terabytes of storage space. That should last me several years at this point, at the rate I've been going. I have the option to expand for more. This is a really cool case that I got. It's got storage space. It's meant for this. As you can see, there's things here, and there's several different options and features that could be in here. One of the things was expanding to fit even more drives, which is why I specifically got the motherboard that I did, because it had enough ports. It's why I got all the drives that I did. The case itself was meant to fit it. Interestingly, not exactly. They The case can fit a lot of hard drives, but it also can fit a lot of SSDs instead of hard drives, or it could fit a lot of hard drives instead of some of the other features, like some of the extra fans that I put onto here. As it is, I wound up doing this section right here in the middle wasn't actually designed to go here. It's meant to go back here where I have a power supply. I'm running 2 power supplies in this right now with an adapter so that they'll both turn on when the motherboard turns on, which was an interesting thing for me to learn, and I'd never done anything like that before. But these are mounted here to the bottom where you could put a radiator if you were water cooling it. I have absolutely no intention of water cooling anything that's just going to be on all the time as a storage device. So instead I mounted more of these hard drive brackets in here, and theoretically this can go all the way up. You do run a risk at some point of them all being attached together, so I'm not sure if I will go to the entire thing, but in theory I could put 20 drives in total in here, which would be really cool and would hold a lot of storage space. I don't have to have a graphics card or anything because I am strictly using this as a server, as just data storage. There's a lot more that could be done with the software that I'm running on here instead of Windows or Linux or anything. I think it's technically Linux, but it's called Unraid. There is RAID is your more standard storage, like backup storage device software. Unraid is really cool because what Unraid does, you put in one of your drives. The biggest drive I have on here is 16 terabytes. That is my main drive. You lose one drive entirely as your backup. Every drive you install after that just has to be smaller or the same size as that main one, and you can continue to expand. Whereas, to my understanding of it, if I were to upgrade later down the road and put in more drives, I would have to wipe everything, add more drives, and then boot all back up, which means that I have to have a place for all the storage, all of the data that's on here to go in the meantime. That's not really an option for me. This was, from my research, the best option that I could find with everything here. That being said, what Unraid does, as I said, it sacrifices one of your drives, your parity drive. You don't get to put any storage space on that, but it takes that and it spreads out all the data across of it so that when one drive fails, it can rebuild from what it has in another one, I think. Either way, it's not really a backup. A backup is to have it in a different location. Technically, there is a 3-2-1 rule where you have 3 copies of your backup. 2 of them are of a different medium, which I don't know how that applies anymore, because it used to be like you put it on film or something physical, like a tape or something, and then another one should be offsite. I don't really have the option for all of that. As you might notice, I'm in a new space that's a lot smaller. I barely ever do that. So we have this, it's just going to hold all of the videos that I'll be recording over the next few years. Eventually, when I get the money again, we'll build a second one. And that way I do actually have a backup. But for the time being, all in all, I spent more than $2,000 on this. Mostly, more than half of that went towards just drive space so that I could expand up to 100 terabytes, which is where I'm at. But everything worked out here. I originally planned to get all of the parts to this and build it and make a video about it and have that, and not just do an explanation 2 months later. That didn't really go according to plan. I got it, I started building it, I ran into some trouble, I had to modify the case to make certain things fit as I was learning and doing it. I was recording all of that, and then I get it done and I go, okay, I'm really tired, I've spent like 6 hours building this. I'm just ready to be done with it, and I forgot to test everything as I was going, and I go to boot it on, it won't turn on. Long story short, even though I've heard more than enough times that buying used computer components is kind of a mixed bag, sometimes it works out fine. I wouldn't buy a graphics card given the whole crypto mining. I would not buy one of those used, but processor should be fine, right? Well, the processor was the problem. I didn't find out that until after a lot of testing and going through many forums on saying, okay, this won't even post, I can't even, like, it's not responsive when I turn it on. I've taken everything apart, I put it just on a box, plugged it in, still not getting anything, and eventually that led down to it could be the processor, which did seem the most likely because it was either the processor or it was the motherboard. Now the motherboard was brand new, as is everything else on here except for the processor, until I got a new processor, which, to be fair, was actually a better solution. I was trying to save some money because I was spending so much as it was on things, and this only happened as it lined up. I made the joke of selling photos to cats, but not really. It was because I had money coming in from the contract work, and usually I'd been taking that and putting that towards savings and splitting it between savings and paying debt off. And instead I decided to solve this problem and use the money for that. I also had an extra paycheck in May. All of that came together to do this. Now, what I originally tried to do was cheap out and get a cheaper processor used that would not allow me to use onboard graphics, which means that I would actually have to have a graphics card in there. Not a big deal. I had an old extra graphics card that I just needed to plug in. I don't need it to run a display. I just need it to be turned on and able to be connected over the network by any of my other computers. This was a much better option because now I'm not wasting extra power running a graphics card, wearing one down that I'm not using anyway for anything. I could use this as a server and stream movies off of it. I could use it to run a virtual copy of Windows. I could use it as a normal computer. I'm not going to do any of that. I have no intention of doing any of that. I just need it to exist as a server, allow me to back up my files to it, and then just sit there and keep everything the way it needs to be. This works for that. There's a couple of things that I do want to upgrade still to it. For one thing, when I start expanding and adding more drives, there's only so many ports on the motherboard, and I'm pretty much at capacity with these 10 that are in there right now. But when I want to put in more, I'll just add more. I'll add special cards to the motherboard that allow me to convert into additional ports I've already looked up, and then I'll be able to plug in more hard drives. I've looked up which ones to buy. I could put more RAM in it because it's very RAM intensive. It does not actually need anything. It does not need a hard drive to boot necessarily. It boots off of a USB stick, Unraid. Unraid's very small. You just put a USB stick in it. This motherboard that I did not discover when I bought it, but it turns out a really neat feature of it, is that it has a USB port, a full-size USB port, on the motherboard itself, as opposed to on an external port like you would on any other computer. So that allows me to just plug in a little. It allows me to plug in a flash drive like this. Just a little thumb drive like what you would expect. This is a backup because you're supposed to keep a backup of it so you always have access. I've already got one plugged into there, and then I have my backup right here. That's all the OS needs. Everything's based off of RAM. So I've got, what do I have, 16 gigs or maybe 32 in there? I've already forgotten because I built it 2 months ago. 16 gigs of RAM works. I could expand it, and I will one day, put 2 more sticks in there, maybe upgrade the whole thing as it is. Besides that, I think really the only other thing that I could upgrade at this point, besides putting more drives into it, is the stock cooler. The stock cooler is fine, it works. I'd rather get something just to make sure that it stays cool, since again, this thing runs 24/7 when I don't have it unplugged and up on top of a table to show that's what I did. And because I can't help myself, some of my favorite colors are orange and teal. That's what I made all the lights look like. That's what I made the desk look like. I've got a keyboard and mouse that are orange and teal. If I'm gonna do it, why not make it look good? The last thing I'll mention about it, I had an idea, and it didn't come to fruition as it was, but I don't really go in on naming much stuff. I don't name my car. I don't put personal attachment and things like that, but you do have to name a computer. You literally have to name it so that it can go onto the network and be found by other devices. You have to create a name for it. And I thought, well, it's huge, and it's a backup server. BUS. It's a bus. So I almost named it the Airbus A380, just because I know that's a gigantic plane. But then I thought, wait, I'm going to be expanding it at some point in time. So it's going to get smaller or larger. It's going to be able to change size by putting more drives into it. I don't remember what else. I don't think it's not purple. I came up with a whole reason why. Now I'm forgetting why. Anyway, I named it the Night Bus after Harry Potter because it's a bus and it gets bigger and smaller as they need it to be. I thought that was funny. What I really wanted to do was buy a little Lego set of the Night Bus and either put it in there or put it on top or something, but I don't. That's completely unnecessary. That's an extra step that I don't have the money for to spend at that point. But that's how I solved my data problem. I built a server. Hopefully, nothing will happen to the data in the meantime until I can build an actual backup for it. Realistically, nothing I have is like professional sent off to another company or something that I would have to keep a backup, like I'm under contract to have that backed up in some data way. If it was something like that, I would absolutely take everything I could. I would be paying, I've looked it up, it's like hundreds of dollars a month to have cloud storage in the terabyte size, which is what I would need to back up some of the files. Realistically, if anything happened and I lost data in some way, it's on YouTube. I could download it off of there. There's my real cloud server backup, is that it's there. I don't trust that. It's not a great plan, but this should do for now. This will allow me to put all of my files on there and expand as I need to. If I continue putting, let's see, I think I can fit 9 more drives in. If I put 9 more 16 terabyte drives in, we're looking pretty good. It's already really heavy. It's gonna get really, really heavy. And it should be okay. I do worry about all the spinning disks all at once, which is why I can come back around to this. Power supply, that was something that I learned as I started looking up. Hard drives, when you first boot up, it has to send out a large amount of power to each hard drive. So the more hard drives you stack into there, the more power it's going to draw all at once. It probably would overwhelm a single power supply if I put everything in there, unless I went crazy and bought, you know, a more than 1,000-watt power supply. But at that point, I could just buy 2. It has the functionality, so it does actually have 2 power supplies in it running at the same time. I have one here that everything is plugged in. This is just, the one in the front is just powered to some of the drives. I split them up, and then there's one back behind it that you can't see that's behind a shroud that powers the main computer and all of those components. And by splitting them up, I hope to keep that load across both of them. I haven't had any trouble with it so far, so hopefully that continues as it is, and I should be able to expand to put all of them into there. I've forgotten at this point because, again, 2 months ago when I did all of my research and I built all of this, I looked it up at one point and it said about how many watts a hard drive will pull when it first turns on. In theory, should be fine. To expand all the way up, the only other thing would be the drive spinning, which is why they have only 2 drives mounted in each one of these sections. As you can see, there's 2 and then a space and then 2, and each one of them, they're all mounted to there. In theory, you could have run into trouble with them stacking them like this without anything, because if they're all spinning at the same time, the mini vibrations could start to affect, you know, the drive underneath it and the drive underneath it. So it probably is not recommended to just stack all the way up to here, even though they are installed with little rubber vibration absorbers. I don't know if I want to chance it. That's a long time in the future. Like I said, it took me about 1.5 years to fill up 20 terabytes. If I have 100, maybe I'll be good for the next 5 years. Maybe.